to share 12-minute case studies related to nature-based solutions and climate change mitigation in protected areas. Related to greening operations in protected areas. Each case study will be followed by 3 minutes of questions. Speakers are reminded to please respect the time allotted. I'll provide a verbal time reminder at the 10-minute mark and again at the 12-minute mark. I will now list the speakers for today's workshop and would ask that, well, I know that they're present. We have a comfortable number with us today. So the speakers today will be Trevor Shiomi, a sustainability engineer with Parks Canada. We have Chris Fairbrother, landscape and biodiversity strategy lead with the South Downs National Park Authority of UK National Parks. We have Tim Duckmonton, the team leader strategy and environment for the Lake District National Park Authority in the UK. We have Sean Norton, the program manager of sustainable operations with the US National Park Service. And finally, we have Genti Kromida with the Institute for Nature Conservation in Albania. So those are our speakers for today. All the presentations today will be delivered in English. If you require translation, we encourage you to activate the live caption feature in Microsoft Teams if you have access to that functionality. I'll provide a short demonstration in a moment if people would like. Would anyone like a demonstration of the Microsoft Teams live caption and translation function? Please raise your hand if so. Okay, seeing no hands raised, and please feel free to do. Oh, sorry, that is excellent. Okay, great. I'll provide a demonstration in a moment. We also encourage you to download the Microsoft Translator app on your phone or tablet and use the microphone feature to live translate the audio coming from your computer into the language of your choice if you don't have the Microsoft Teams functionality. You can follow translated captions on the screen of your device. The link for the Microsoft Translator app, which is a free download, will be provided in the chat. And just bear with me one moment and I will share a couple of screenshots that demonstrate for you how to use the live caption feature. Great. So you'll see my colleagues Tara Sharma and Alice Yu at Parks Canada. So in Teams, you scroll to the More section of your Teams dialog box. Scroll down to Language and Speech and turn on your live captions. Then you're able to select the language that people are speaking or that the presenter is speaking on your screen. So be that English, all of our presentations today will be in English. And then finally, when you've selected that language, you have the captions enabled at the bottom. You're then able to go to these 3 dots and select the language in which you want the caption to appear. In this example, I've chosen French. So for me, I see the captioned language in French. That's as simple as it is. It will translate everything for you in real time. Does anyone have any questions? Great. Seeing none, I'll now move into the introduction of the first speaker, who will be James Stewart. And prior to James speaking, I'm just going to provide a tiny bit of context. Tara, can I ask you to please share the map?
Yeah, yes, just a second.
What you're about to see is a map of the signatories, the current signatories to the Protected and Conserved Areas Joint Statement on the climate change and biodiversity crises. There are presently 26 signatories, and we'll have an opportunity to see what the geographic distribution of those signatories is. So we do have representation of a number of regions of the world, and the Antarctica, the data point on Antarctica represents the global organizations that have signed, such as the World Commission on Protected Areas. We are presently absent in South America. There is a parallel accord or commitment made by South American and Latin American organizations. But of course, the joint statement remains open, and it is possible for other organizations to sign on over time. Thanks very much, Tara. I will now hand or give the floor to James Stewart with One Planet Consulting. And James started this whole initiative, and he's the reason one could say that we're here today. James, over to you.
Fabulous, and thank you very much. And hopefully everything's working fine. Somebody holler at me if it's not. But yeah, so as much as my consultancy is One Planet Consulting, in fact, this was all kicked off by UK national parks. So the 15 UK national parks came together, and I won't give you every element of the history, but I thought I'd give you a little bit of a sense of the origin point of that statement for those of you who aren't familiar with it, but then really try and focus on, so what? What does that mean here and now, and why are we coming together? So that origin point really comes back to COP26, the national park I was part of at the time, Loch Lomond and Trossachs, was literally 20 miles away. And it felt, with a global platform on our doorstep, it felt appropriate and right to seek to do something. And a number of people in this call we turned to for some thought, some inspiration and guidance to work out how might we capitalise on that process. Because the sad reality was our family of protected and conserved areas have been effectively systematically absent from the UNFCCC discussions. And that's not because anything deliberate, it's just that other things have somewhat superseded, whether that's discussion about aviation or energy or something else. We haven't really been able to articulate our views, the role we can play as effectively as we might. And that is what the statement is there to try and do. It's the beginning point, it's not the end state. It's the beginning of helping others discover and understand what we know. What we know is that as a group, a family of protected and conserved areas that spans the planet, we are building towards 30% of the planet. We have a unique set of relationships with our communities, with our places, with the nature, and that we have this, the custody, the stewardship of. And we can play and should play a huge role in the joint crises, this dual crisis of climate change and biodiversity loss. And if we can't get it right, actually the other 70% of the planet is guaranteed not to get it right. So there is a monstrous onus on us to figure out how to step up and play that. And we are big enough as a family across the globe to be the determining factor. We can be the difference, as some may put it. But beyond that, we have other great things, not simply scale at our advantage. We have huge reach, we can engage. And if you take just 2 of the national park within the family, there are 100 million visitors to the UK national parks each year, and there's somewhere north of 320 million visitors to the US national parks every year. That is nearly 500 million visitors, and we've only accounted for 2 of our members of our family. We literally have billions of visitors we can engage with. So if on 2 accounts, we are of the scale and magnitude that could be making a difference. And we probably know this, but it's fair to say that doesn't sit on a global platform, and it should. And that's what we're trying to do through that statement, is convene and encourage a greater understanding of the latent capability that this family could have. So, but what's the ambition? Well, the ambition isn't simply to express that. The ambition is to mobilize that, to find ways to help encourage decision makers, investors, people in any shape and form that can help us unlock that potential and be that determining the difference between humanity succeeding in our quest for a net zero, nature positive planet and us failing. And our work is tough, and we've got a lot to do in the coming years. So how are we going to go about it? Well, of course, making statements is one thing, talking on platforms is another, but in reality, much of the most important work is done at this level, between our families, sharing our understanding, who has piloted and tried something and who can share that with somebody else to accelerate our capability across the planet. And that is what this meeting and this set of forums have been about. And a huge testament to Parks Canada for picking up the baton from the kicking off of the statement and turning that into something practical that starts to drive meaningful change. Our journey doesn't stop here. It's not only about this, and in fact, later this month, the Protected Area Leaders Forum is coming together, and one of the discussions at that forum will be about global leadership and how do we accelerate this ever further still, so that we are seen as an important and priority investment to make as we go forward. But it comes back again to how we make the most of that, how we connect and unpick what we can achieve, and sharing of information and knowledge transfer is a major platform of one of the elements of the statement. And actually, in this particular instance, thinking about our operations, it is directly linked to our credibility. We cannot challenge others beyond our boundaries or within our sphere of influence to consider their emissions, what they're doing and how they are improving it if we haven't got or are in the process of getting our own house in order. And this, therefore, this particular strand of activity is intimately related to our credibility. So that, for me, makes today all the more important. We've got to have a platform of credibility to be able to lead. And so this work, I think, and I'm looking forward to seeing the information from across the speakers, and I know there's a host of other things beyond, that is our platform of credibility upon which we can then exercise global leadership and actually start to unlock what can really be possible. So I hope that helps by way of a bit of an insight. I hope you get a sense of how important I think that this meeting and these meetings are. And Alex, thanks to you and the team again for pulling this together, and look forward to hearing from the other presenters.
Excellent. Thank you so much, James. It's certainly our pleasure, and we're a big family, a big global family. It's great to come together around initiatives like this, and thank you again for the inception of the entire process on the heels of COP26. We'll now turn to my colleague and our colleague at Parks Canada, Holly Easton, and I just want to give a very important kudos to Holly, who really pulled together the survey effort around the joint statement, and it pulled everything together to showcase at COP15. So thank you, Holly. And Holly will be presenting on the results from the joint statement signatory survey. Over to you.
Good morning. Thanks, James. Thanks, Alex. So I'm happy to be here. So this is my, let me just load up my notes. So could you go to my first slide, Tara? Okay. So integral to addressing the dual crisis of climate change and biodiversity loss is the understanding that the environmental impact knows no borders. And so for this reason, the joint statement really emphasizes the importance of collaborative and ambitious actions. And what we found through our survey is that the actions taken by signatories are really emphasizing nature-based climate solutions and strategic land and sea use. Next slide. So in the lead up to COP15 in December 2022, myself from Parks Canada, in collaboration with UK Parks and WCPA, crafted and sent out this initial survey to all current signatories. As the joint statement was and still is a new project, we wanted to take a pretty broad approach about that would allow us to establish a baseline understanding of the methods and projects that different signatories are taking to measure carbon accounting and emissions reduction. And what's clear from our data is that no two organizations are alike. So the strategies and the projects, the accounting methods and the data that's being collected really isn't easily converted across organizations. So what this survey offers us is an opportunity to build a shared language and understanding between signatories of carbon accounting and emissions reduction practices. So getting into the results, of the 26 signatories, we received 16 total respondents. Some of these submissions represent individual protected and conserved areas, and some are umbrella organizations representing multiple areas. Next. And what we found is the, oh, sorry, next slide, Tara. Oh, there we go, sorry. Delay on my, sorry, could we go back one? I think there was a delay on my end, thank you. What we found is that the 36% of respondents that had already established a baseline accounting for carbon found, is that 36% of respondents had already established a baseline accounting for carbon found in their natural ecosystems, and 40% of respondents had established a baseline carbon accounting for energy, transportation, and infrastructure, so what we called their operational assets. Establishing a baseline carbon accounting was seen by respondents as an initial step towards addressing climate change and biodiversity loss. And along the side of these slides, you'll see some quotes from signatories on some of the actions they're undertaking. Okay, next. Over 64% of respondents had plans to increase carbon sequestration through strategic directed action. Next. And over 80% of current and planned sequestration activities are focused on ecological restoration. As seen in this figure, respondents placed a specific focus on woodland restoration and peatland restoration, which combined for around 50% of planned planned sequestration activities. Next. Over 50% of respondents have plans to reduce their carbon emissions from natural ecosystems, and 71% of respondents had plans to reduce their operational carbon emissions derived from energy use, transportation, and infrastructural assets. Next. And when we delve into that a bit deeper, we see that targeted areas for emissions reduction focused on operational changes, with electricity, travel, and waste being the clear priority, representing over 72% of respondents' planned emissions reductions activity. Next. And then we look at this table, which I realize is a bit hard to see, but what we have here are priority projects for respondents for emissions reductions activities and their current maturity status, so from conceptual to operational. And there are some reoccurring projects that were very interesting, including the greening of fleets, a focus on visitor-focused reductions, so reducing the impact of visitor centers or increasing public awareness of travel emissions, and habitat restoration, of course, both inside and outside park boundaries. Next. And then to sum up, some of our key messages we see are that 47% of respondents have increased their emissions reductions activities since signing the joint statement, which is amazing. Respondents continually emphasize the value of baseline carbon accounting as an initial step towards addressing the dual crisis. And we see a continued dedication from signatories towards protecting, conserving, and restoring carbon-rich ecosystems. And that's everything from me. So thank you very much. And I'll turn that back.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Holly. That was excellent. Before we get into the full presentation agenda for today, that concludes our introductory presentations. I realize I should tell you a little bit, for those who are unfamiliar, tell you a little bit about your host at Parks Canada. So Parks Canada's mandate on behalf of the people of Canada is to protect and present nationally significant examples of Canada's natural and cultural heritage, and to foster public understanding, appreciation, and enjoyment in ways that ensure their ecological and commemorative integrity for present and future generations. The agency is the largest administrator of federal crown lands in Canada. Those are public lands, and protecting, as of 2020, over 450,000 square kilometers of lands, waters, and ice in 47 national parks, 5 national marine conservation areas, 1 national urban park, and 171 national historic sites, including 9 historic canals. The agency is responsible for a diverse range of operations, from avalanche response along mountain highways to wildfire response in all parks. Parks Canada employees and resources are active in over 450 communities and remote locations from coast to coast to coast across Canada. Parks Canada also works closely with approximately 300 Indigenous communities and has over 30 formal collaborative arrangements with Indigenous partners across the country. The agency recognizes Indigenous peoples' roles and leadership in the stewardship of their traditional territories, and promotes the connection and reconnection of Indigenous peoples to the lands, waters, and ice of their traditional territories, and supports Indigenous voices in commemorating and celebrating Indigenous cultures and histories. I'm joining you today from Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people in the area also known as Nova Scotia, Canada. And with that, I will hand the floor to my colleague Trevor Shiomi, who will be presenting on Parks Canada's pathway to greening operations. And just a reminder to all speakers, I'll jump in at the 10-minute mark and again at the 12-minute mark. Thank you. Over to you, Trevor.
All right. Thank you very much, Alex. So hello, my name's Trevor Shiomi. I am a sustainability engineer with Parks Canada's Technical and Specialist Services team, and I'm pleased to be here today to share some of the examples of what Parks Canada is doing in the realm of greening its operations. Next slide. So before we dive into the approach that Parks Canada is taking to green its operations, I'll provide a bit of context for what Parks Canada's greening commitments and kind of where they come from. So the first is the Federal Sustainable Development Act. That's the kind of broad overarching legal framework for developing and implementing the federal and departmental sustainable development strategies. This federal strategy is structured and is aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and brings together sustainable development goals, targets, milestones, and implementation strategies from across the government of Canada, so together all in one place. So under the Act, federal organizations are required to develop departmental sustainable development strategies, which detail how each department will implement Parks Canada, or it will implement Canada's sustainability commitments. So the greening government strategy is the policy instrument that details the specific commitments that federal organizations will take as it relates to greening operations. So these include things like greenhouse gas emissions reductions, waste diversion, water conservation, green procurement, and climate resiliency, to just name a few. The two boxes at the bottom represent the two primary targets as it pertain to greenhouse gas emissions reductions and fleet procurement under the greening government strategy. Next slide. So Parks Canada's efforts to green its operations are supported by some key federal organizations that assume leadership roles to advance greening operations on behalf of the government of Canada as a whole. In overarching support of Canada's sustainability goals, the Federal Sustainable Development Strategy, which I touched on the previous slide, is led by Environment and Climate Change Canada. At the operational level, Treasury Board Secretariat's Centre for Greening Government leads and supports federal organization in progressing towards net zero, climate resilient, and green operations. Parks Canada, along with other federal organizations, also benefits from some expert support departments that lead a variety of different parallel initiatives that collectively essentially advance sustainability objectives on behalf of the government. And these include initiatives related to green procurement, notably the clean electricity procurement, electrification of real property and fleet, climate change resiliency, and innovative clean technologies, just to name a few. Next slide, please. So Parks Canada is taking an all-hands-on-deck kind of approach to green its operations, where every little bit matters and every functional team across the organization is being engaged. And in line with this approach, Parks Canada has established the Greening Operations Coordination Committee. And the purpose of this committee is really to anchor greening efforts across Parks Canada and provide a collaborative forum to share ideas and resources and learnings, promote innovative partner-supported solutions, catalyze strategic efforts to achieve some of our commitments, and ensure that the tracking and progress towards our goals and targets. And there are several initiatives that this committee directly supports, and I'll cover those over the next few slides. Next slide. So the first is the development of a net zero portfolio plan, and this is aimed at supporting ongoing efforts to improve the sustainability of our overall portfolio, our asset portfolio. The plan will provide a roadmap for Parks Canada to achieve net zero operations by 2050 by presenting options for reducing operational Scope 1 and Scope 2 GHG emissions. The plan will be used to support and inform several aspects of our internal decision-making, including the identification of priority areas, strategic investment decision-making, and optimizing operational practices to improve energy efficiency, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and achieve climate resiliency. Next slide, please. So the second initiative supported by Parks Canada's committee are the regional greening operations workshops that have been designed and established to establish a consistent approach for greening our operations. These workshops engage directly with our operational units across the country to support the identification of priority areas and solutions for greenhouse gas reductions. Next slide, please. The final initiative that this committee is supporting is an internal greening story map, which we've used to share greening operations projects, initiatives from across our operational units. The story map allows for our opportunities to share successes, lessons learned, best practices, and promote replicability amongst Parks Canada's regions and our operational units. Next slide, please. So the remaining few slides kind of just demonstrate a few of the specific on-the-ground examples of how Parks Canada is greening its operations, its partnerships, and its service offerings. So first off, when we're building new facilities, we're designing, constructing state-of-the-art, high-performance buildings. So the new Parks Canada Collections and Curatorial Center is one that's currently under construction, and it's going to house over 25 million archaeological and historical objects in Gatineau, Quebec. The building will incorporate key green building practices, such as achieving net zero carbon footprint by solely using renewable electricity. So benefited by the fact that it's in Quebec, they benefit with the hydroelectric grid to power its operations. So two other examples of projects that are currently in the design phase include the Rouge National Urban Park Visitor Center and the Lake Superior Discovery Center, both public-facing facilities. And both projects will yield high performance net zero buildings, with the Lake Superior Discovery Center taking things even a step further by making use of solar and geothermal energy in pursuit of a net positive building. Next slide, please. So we are also upgrading our existing facilities as well. So many of the projects that you see on this screen here, photos from the projects we see on the screen here, were funded through the Greening Government Fund, which is an initiative led by Treasury Board Secretariat's Center for Greening Government. And the fund provides federal organizations with supplemental funding for projects that are aimed at greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And Parks Canada has been successful through this initiative with a few of the projects you see on the screen, which a lot of it's been predominantly solar-based. So the first one was a project in Kluane National Park Reserve, located in the Yukon. And this involved the construction of a roof-mounted solar array to a newly constructed trades building and adjacent operations building. That's the photo you see in the top right. The Jeremy's Bay Campground project included the construction of this photovoltaic solar array to offset electrical consumption from visitors using the campground to reduce greenhouse gas emissions at Kejimkujik National Park and historic site located in Nova Scotia. That's the one you see at the top left. And then finally, Yahatinda National Historic Site, located in Alberta. A solar microgrid was installed for this site to supplement the power supply to buildings. That's using a hybrid solar diesel power generation system to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and maintain a reliable power source in a remote off-grid location. Prior to this system being installed, we've seen an 85% reduction in diesel consumption at the site, so fairly substantial gains at this site. Next slide, please. So Parks Canada provides services, as Alex alluded to the public from coast to coast to coast. And in 2019, we took advantage of a donation program whereby Tesla donated electric vehicle charging stations for the installation at Parks Canada places across the country. As part of this program, for every Tesla level 2 charger, we received also a generic level 2 charger. And this helped Parks Canada play a leadership role in providing EV charging services to Canadians who are making personal choices to reduce their GHG emissions, and contributed to Government of Canada efforts to expand the charging network across the country. Currently, there are over 240 EV charging stations across Parks Canada places, and we continue to install chargers in our operations compounds as well to support, an expanding and a growing electric fleet as well. With regards to zero emission vehicles or that electric fleet, Parks Canada is also seeing a year-over-year increases in the number of zero emission vehicles we have within our fleet. As of 2022-2023, Parks Canada had 71 zero-emission light-duty vehicles, which includes roughly equivalent amounts of both plug-in hybrids and fully electric light-duty vehicles. Next slide, please. So there's lots of great work out there being done by various organizations striving to contribute to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, and we like to join forces as much as we possibly can. One example of where we're trying to work with others is on the topic of greening of our small marine vessels or smaller boats. Parks Canada has about 200 small boats, and we're part of this interdepartmental marine fleet low zero emission initiative that's being led by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, another federal department, along with Transport Canada and a few other federal departments as well. Waterton Townsite is also another good example. It's located at the end of a power transmission line in southern Alberta, And this has created historically has created power distribution issues. So in 2021, Fortis Alberta, which is one of the main power producers in Alberta, approached Parks Canada to take part in a pilot program to improve electrical system reliability through the installation of a photovoltaic batteries and energy storage system. And this supports operations in Waterton Lakes National Park, as I said, in southern Alberta. Banff National Park continues to support the operation and expansion of public transit within and adjacent to Banff National Park. In 2021, the first 3 fully electric buses were added to the Bow Valley Regional Transit Service Commission's fleet, and that's being operated by Rome Transit. And there's an additional 3 fully electric buses that'll be added in this coming year. Next slide, please.
And just a reminder, that's 10 minutes, Trevor.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Parks Canada employees are motivated to green our operations, and this is very clear through the various local grassroots workplace and green team led initiatives throughout the country we see. Just give a few examples. So Manitoba's operational unit, our field unit based in Churchill's office, has a battery electric all-terrain vehicle that they refer to as the Sun Buggy, and it's used for small trips around town for mail delivery, for general errands. And what makes this vehicle unique is that it's fitted with solar panels to offset electricity usage. And this allows the vehicle to essentially run all summer long without needing to be even plugged in. Just to kind of touch on a few other non-greenhouse gas emissions projects. So in Point Pelee and Puckasaw National Parks in Ontario, plastic waste and wasteful packaging from firewood and kindling has been reduced by switching over to paper bags and reusable totes, respectively. And as kind of a general statement, Parks Canada always tries to make sure to reuse supplies and repurpose building materials overall for any sort of wherever it's feasible to reduce operational waste that we generate. So, next slide. And that concludes the presentation. I thank you for your time. I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Trevor. That was excellent. Any questions for Trevor? You can just use the raise hand function.
Hi, Trevor. Sean Norton, National Park Service USA. And I don't want to take up too much time with questions. I think I can follow up post-workshop to get some additional information. Be more interested in hearing about your regional workshops and how they're constructed, what your agenda, how the actual format, what your delivery is, and then be more interested in hearing about your story maps and how you construct those, and what's the audience and how many folks are you hoping to reach with those story maps?
Yeah, absolutely. So just on the workshops, that's something I'm directly leading myself. We engage directly with our operational units. The information in terms of scope and what we're covering at this present time is really GHG, or greenhouse gas emissions focused. We walk, essentially what we're doing is we're kind of initiating that discussion and trying to raise awareness within our operational units on their greenhouse gas emissions profile. So we walk them through the greenhouse gas emissions profiles, show them where their challenging areas are. It's kind of taking more of an active engagement approach. Previously, our engagement approach is more of a passive format where we sent out an email that kind of communicated the annual report for greenhouse gas emissions for that given year. Now we're taking a bit more of a hands-on, hand-holding, walking operational teams through this and discussing priority areas and what are some of the solutions and what are some of the projects that are in their hopper of things that they'll work on in the coming year. So we've kind of timed it in such a way that it's aligned well with their annual planning exercises. So they get their budgets, they start planning what sort of work it's going to transpire that year, and so it allows us to kind of take advantage of that timeline to kind of make sure that greening and GHG reductions is kind of prioritized and added to their growing list of projects that they've got on their list. As with regards to the story map, so it's something that was just released this current fiscal year, so just in April of this year. It's an internal map-based like GIS system essentially, where we've got if you go back to the slide, if you go back to that slide, you'll kind of see those are actually screen caps from our system, but you can kind of hover over the map-based system for various different categories. It's not exclusively greenhouse gas emissions reductions, but it also includes things like waste diversion and any other sustainability, water conservation initiatives and projects that have kind of taken place across the country. So you can kind of hover over it and allows the users to see what the project was, have a point of contact within that particular project, and allows us to kind of replicate or learn from each other as we go along. We did a pilot workshop going back about a year ago, and one of the things we took away from that is there's a lot of really good work that's going on across the country that's just not shared. It's not shared broadly. So this was our kind of solution for that, was let's try to develop this map-based system where users can take a look at it. And so it's open to all Parks Canada, like across internally within Parks Canada. And then I know our CEO was our president and CEO was looking at also, there was some appetite to make it an external map-based system as well. So I think they're the team that's looking at that is currently exploring what the options are for that.
Excellent. Thank you, Trevor. And Chris, I know you had a question earlier, but I'm not sure if Trevor answered it.
It kind of did. It was about the story map approach as well. I was interested in it, in how it could share best practice, particularly around adaptation responses. But I can pick that up. I got most of what I needed from Trevor's response. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. And just in the interest of time, I see that James has placed a very relevant question, and I think something that's always top of mind for us in the chat. I'd like to hold that question because I think it will apply to a number of presentations we'll see. And it certainly is something that, again, is of interest to all of us. With that in mind, I'll move us on to Chris, who will be presenting on carbon baseline assessments, establishing a common framework for carbon and net zero targets for the UK National Parks family. Take it away, Chris.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome from the sunny South Downs on the south coast of England. I'm presenting today on the carbon baseline assessment work we've done collectively with the 15 UK national parks. I'm Chris Fairbrother. I'm the Landscape and Biodiversity Strategy Lead at the South Downs National Park Authority. But I also have a role as a convener for the UK National Park Climate Change and Energy Group, and it's from that role that this piece of work has kind of developed.
Next slide, Tara.
Yeah, so picking up really on James's points earlier about the national parks and protected landscapes in terms of the unique position they have to make a difference. The UK national parks have been quite active on climate change for some time, decades even, but that's been more focused on adaptation planning and reporting. And I think there's certainly been a recognition more recently that we have a much more of a role to play and a contribution to make in terms of addressing the climate and nature emergency. So we've been working on developing a national delivery plan around climate action, particularly. So adopting that leadership role, stepping into that space that perhaps national government are kind of neglecting in response to the climate emergency. We certainly have a role in terms of increasing public understanding of the impacts of climate change, particularly on our treasured landscapes and habitats and species, and demonstrating also how rapid transition to low carbon living can be achieved. And we in the UK have been promoting this principle of achieving net zero with nature, so very much focused on the nature-based solutions element at end of the spectrum. Next slide, please. In terms of the UK, we have 15 national parks across the country and 46 A&Bs, which are the sort of national protected landscapes. Overall, collectively, that represents around 18% of the UK land area. So again, picking up on James's point earlier, that is an enormous area of land where we can make a big influence in terms of achieving scale rapidly. And we already operate at landscape scale. And as was mentioned, in terms of our visitors and resident numbers, we have about 1.5 million people resident in the national parks across the UK and around 250 million visitors per year. So we can exert a real influence in terms of influencing behaviour change and driving this rapid transition across the parks, but also the strong brand and high profile of these areas mean that we can influence far beyond their boundaries, both in terms of regionally, but also nationally and internationally. And I think, it's reflecting also on the nature of the partnerships that we have. They work across, they span local communities, landscape scale and regional, and also to the national level. Next slide, please. So just to reiterate the importance of the carbon baseline work, really, initially we had no real idea around our trajectory to net zero. We had no sense of how achievable it was. There was no science-based approach. So we worked with a Small World Consulting, who are leaders in this field in terms of carbon baseline assessment, at least in the UK. And we commissioned them to work with us to do a piece of carbon baseline work. We took a consumption-based approach. So we looked at the sort of lifestyles, goods and services of our residents and visitors, in terms of travel and visitors to the area, the industries that were within our areas, resident populations, and the land use and management elements of it. And I think what we were trying to develop here was to ensure we were both Paris compliant, but that taking that wider look at carbon within the national parks was important, because I think if we'd taken a production-based approach, we would have missed out on key sectors such as food, energy, transport, and travel, alongside just the land-based sectors. So we felt taking this consumption-based approach was important to establish, what our role was in terms of this wider carbon picture. Next slide, please. In terms of the aims of the programme, initially we piloted this work within 2 UK national parks, which was the Lake District and South Downs, and it rapidly followed on with the Norfolk Broads. But the idea really was to develop this as a programme across all of the 15 UK national parks, and then to start to encourage the other designated landscapes to follow on. And it was really what we were looking for, was to provide a common framework using the latest data and evidence, so a science-based approach that would really help us to accelerate our response to the climate and nature emergency, and to be able to understand and assess and demonstrate our contribution to the UK national targets, both on an individual national park basis, but also collectively, because we felt this was a good demonstration of the value in investing in these areas in terms of climate action and nature recovery. It's also been an opportunity for us to facilitate learning and exchange knowledge across the UK family. And we've come up with a way that allows us to update our assessments in future years with a minimum of effort. So at present, the assessments cover, as I said, 15 of the national parks. That's all of the UK national parks in Scotland, England, and Wales. And we've extended that reach into 7 of the other designated national landscapes. So there's a few more to follow, but we're hoping they will sign up to it soon. And in terms of the assessment themselves, they include a summary of the total emission reductions resulting from the nature recovery and land cover change that's potential within the national parks. And we can start to inform and develop monitoring and reporting, particularly in relation to land use change and forestry targets. But we'd like to see this help drive habitat improvements and subsequent carbon reductions across the protected landscapes, and make sure that they are properly accounted for in terms of the national reporting. Next slide, please. We've identified there are 6 main categories that the national parks can have an influence around emissions reductions. And these are the areas we've predominantly been prioritizing in terms of follow-up and delivery. And these areas of reduction are particularly around energy use, in terms of resident visitors and industry. And as has been touched on by the previous presenter, a lot of that was community-based renewables, community energy projects. There's also, as I mentioned, the food system, so food and drink, reducing food miles and the carbon footprint of food and drink that we consume. The travel choices that people make to come and visit the parks and travel around within the parks, increasing in vehicle efficiency, use of EVs and active travel, encouraging active travel within the parks too. But the biggest area, I think, is around the land-based CO2 and non-CO2 bits, the more sustainable land management and agricultural practices, habitat restoration, and sort of increased woodland planting. Next slide, please. So effectively, each national park in the UK now has an illustrative pathway to net zero for their area. And that's unique to them in terms of their carbon mix, their habitat, the habitats that are represented within their area. It also means that we can get a sense of the actions that we need to take to reduce carbon emissions and to sequester more carbon, and what opportunities there may be around sequestering carbon in relation to our habitats. The majority of the national parks in the UK are aiming to achieve net zero around 2045 at the latest, and earlier if at all possible. And certainly we're aiming to become effective carbon sinks as quickly as possible. And this does put us slightly in advance of the UK target of 2050, but we feel again this reflects the desire to be in that leadership space. As James said, national parks need to be able to demonstrate these are the places where this needs to happen, and we can demonstrate how it can be done. So the trajectory is based on very significant changes in terms of land cover and a real ramping up in terms of habitat restoration, and also supporting a shift to low carbon economy and to a more restorative agricultural approach. Next slide, please. There are a range of land use change and management options that apply across the national parks in the UK. A lot of national parks are uplands, so we're talking predominantly about peatland restoration in those cases, and it offers a great deal of potential. Obviously, we have large areas of degraded peatland. There's been a lot of restoration work over the recent years. We really need to scale that up and to start to turn those into carbon sinks. In the lowland parks, the focus is much more on new woodland planting, woodland creation, and establishing sort of climate interventions within the farmed landscape as well. So particularly restoring hedgerows, restorative agriculture, as I mentioned, so focusing particularly on improving soil carbon and other interventions within the farm landscape, particularly around things like low or zero tillage, which is in England a really big issue. We've got degraded soils, and it's one of the biggest challenges we face, particularly in the South Downs here, which is a predominantly farmed landscape. So those land use change and management options do vary according to each national park, depending on the specific habitat mix. But the targets are premised on driving significant change across the board. Next slide, please. So in terms of the next step, I think the carbon baseline assessment work has proven the value of this sort of common framework being applied across all of the UK national parks. And it's given us a bit more of an appetite to do more. We'd like to sort of take ownership of this in terms of the monitoring and reporting of our progress towards net zero, and how we can use that to sort of demonstrate the contribution we're able to make collectively to national targets, but also to refine how that is informing how land use change and forestry targets are being monitored, because at the moment it's quite imprecise. It's not really capturing a lot of the activity that's going on at a local level, and we'd like to refine that better. So our approach will become our science-based approach will become better as we go forward. We'd like to integrate the work, particularly on net zero targets, within our management plans and within our climate change adaptation planning as well, and to continue to drive collaboration, not just between the UK national parks, but also with our constituent local authorities and their communities within the national parks. And at the moment, we are using Race to Zero, the UN program around that. We've put in a joint application for the UK national parks, which has been successful. So we'll be taking that forward again as a common framework, and we'll be reporting under the carbon disclosure program. So again, that gives a bit more of a impetus to collaboration and help drive some at a local and a national level. And we're also looking at linking the work that we're doing here to green finance and attracting private sector investment, because again, as I said, being able to demonstrate the how much action we can take on habitat, nature recovery, and driving net zero, particularly through offsetting, we can demonstrate the value in investment in the UK national parks, and that includes in terms of private sector investment. And we've been working to develop a national carbon trading platform called Revere, which is just getting off the ground now, but it's starting to attract a lot of interest. Next slide, please. I think that's that's all I've got to say about the carbon baseline assessment. And I think Tim's going to follow on with a local example of how they've used it in relation to their management plan.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris. And I think on that, with that segue, I'll take advantage of perhaps pausing questions until the end of Tim's presentation for both you and Tim. The floor is yours, Tim.
Thank you. I was getting myself set up. Good afternoon. So I'm Tim. I'm the team leader for strategy and environment at the Lake District National Park Authority, and I work with the Lake District National Park Partnership as the lead climate action officer in the partnership, and that's supported by our chief executive Richard, who's worked across the county on various initiatives. And originally led the first consumption-based carbon budget for a region in England in 2010. So as a national park, prior to the National Park Partnership getting involved, we established the first carbon budget in the county. So this was for the park, and for 10 years we had originally then a ambition to reduce our carbon emissions by 10%. What the partnership achieved at that time, though, was just 4%. So we know this stuff is pretty tough. And during that time, so between 2010 and now, the science, the data, the evidence on it has developed, and Chris has presented a really good summary of where Small World Consulting has supported now the National Parks family in the UK to deliver that at a national level. What we've done in our partnership here is take what we did in 2019 in our current management plan for the Lake District, and this is the information that I'm going to present upon. But I'll update where we're at on the work that Chris did, Chris has talked on in a moment. So in terms of taking all of what Chris has talked about and our carbon budget, in terms of developing our plan, we then shape that up into some activities and actions in the National Park Partnership Plan to reduce carbon emissions. And in this presentation, I'm going to show you what they are. And hopefully, if I remember correctly, give you those figures, because there's a few and they're not always at the top of my head. So in 2019, our current assessment then was that there were 1,773.80 tonnes of carbon emissions in the park every year. And they were pretty much along the reduction or contribution pathways that Chris spoke about earlier. In terms of thinking about adaptation as well as the other side of the coin, and looking towards net zero, we did a climate change adaptation report to look at and think about what's the impact of climate change in the park. That then shaped up our actions, and that took a lot of stakeholder engagement and partnership working over COVID time, so a lot of it online with various groups of people to shape up what I'm about to present to you. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. During the delivery of our work on carbon reduction, the Small World Consulting has updated the baseline, principally updating that more bounce back from COVID. So we know there's more travel in the park. We have about 20 million visitors, just about 6 or 7% of those 250 million people in protected landscapes. 20 million of them come to our park. And then we have the contribution from land use CO2 equivalent emissions. So in updating our emission baseline from 2019 to the current one we're using now, that's added another 349,848 tonnes. So in itself, that sounds big, and it certainly hasn't stopped us from being really committed about what we want to deliver in terms of getting towards net zero. And that zero target is integrated into our county target at the same time with another partner called Zero Carbon Cumbria Partnership. And what work I've done there with that partnership is to try and integrate and align as much as practically possible all our work on it. So our 2037 remains the same. You're going to see on my slide in a moment, actually this extra 349,000 tonnes actually adds another couple of years to it, to 2039. So it might feel a bit more difficult, but we're still working towards that 2037 dates. Can I have the next slide, please? So the updated baseline emission we had from Small World Consulting last September looks like this. So we know where it comes from in terms of energy, food and drink, other food and shopping stuff. We're going to look at that much later. Travel to and from the park. We know there's 20 million visitors here. There's a significant contribution into the carbon emissions into the park. And then land use non-CO2, and then a little bit about what we can offset. Can I have the next slide, please? So, knowing all of that, that then has helped us target where we want to make our biggest interventions. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we quantified that soon. But this is what the descent curve looks like. Looking at our curve, which was originally 2037, we're now looking at 2039 based on that extra updated data and evidence. And in itself, we thought, looked at it as a partnership, oh wow, that's going to be quite difficult. I think through the alignment and close and collaborative working with partners outside of the park that also operate across the park as well in Zero Cumbria Carbon partnership, I think this is achievable to get as much done as possible. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So our partners, who also are partners in ZCCP, the Cumbria Carbon Partnership, have collated and integrated all our climate action activities throughout our partnership plan. So we took the evidence, we looked at the contribution pathways, we know what they turn into in terms of our reduction pathways, our descent pathways for each of those sectors, and we created a set of actions. They appear in various outcome areas of our partnership plan. So in our farming, forestry, nature and climate, in our sustainable travel and transport, particularly for addressing that big, huge bar in the chart I showed you earlier. And then also around our vibrant communities and prosperous economy. In terms of where other activities needed to take place, we started and we've created our climate action outcome in the plan. So our 5 key areas in there are around lobbying government, around making some change for energy reduction, around making it easier to retrofit historic buildings. There's a lot of those in the park. Working through with our partnership as well in terms of that leadership space, in terms of getting partners to and encouraging and supporting them to make carbon emission reductions with their business planning. That's been a real critical driver actually in terms of having that behavioural change through. And you can see they're emboldened there as we're moving through our 5-year plan. So in 23 now, we're looking at getting Zero Carbon Cumbria to integrate our pipeline of projects, looking at where we need to then scale up some of our work over the next 5, 10, 15 years or so to get us on that descent curve. We know we've got to rapidly start doing work on this and then get those pipeline of projects into place, ready to keep us on that line down towards 2039. And then underpinning all that with, I guess, more deeper and meaningful and collaborative community work. Our next iteration of our plan, we want to involve communities in helping us write our next set of actions to help us get to 2037. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So in writing all of our actions throughout the plan, we decided to quantify that. We thought, well, this is pretty ambitious, and it took 2.5 years over COVID times to write this, and just before, during COVID and after, to get us to agree with our partners what we wanted to do. So in terms of our sustainable travel and transport, that works out at 30,851 tonnes or so we think we can take out of the atmosphere. In terms of our farming, forestry and nature, about 35,000 tonnes through some peat restoration work and our nature-based solutions work and woodland creation. And then there's a very small contribution on our vibrant communities and prosperous economy around the grant scheme we had and through our net zero nature projects, which Chris had mentioned earlier. In terms of that, it's about 20% of what we actually needed to achieve. If I was to show you a different graph, I could explain to you that we needed to reduce about 880,000 tonnes in that first set of data that we used in terms of putting our plan together. And this, our actions at the moment only show us we could achieve, if we delivered them, just 20% of that. So that leaves us a big gap of 80% to fill. And this is why it's really tough, and this is why in our climate action outcome we have these other pipelines of projects where we have this behavioural change work to be able to implement some policy and some actions further down the line to help us catch up and stay on that descent curve as close as possible, because once you start drifting on it, that line starts to go a bit further into the future, and that's not what we want to know, knowing that we've got to address the nature and climate crisis. The actions that I'm showing here that we've quantified include increasing the decarbonisation of travel as a priority for that, increasing opportunities for sustainable travel and active travels, people getting on their bikes, for example, and making use of digital connectivity and technology to help and encourage people use public transport better, as well as they're looking at work to with Revere to fund some of this through our Nature with Net Zero work. Can I have the next slide, please?
Great. And
so I think in my experience of trying to take the evidence base, looking through where the reduction pathways and science-based targets are taking us, my reflection on this in terms of a local application of the work that Chris has presented on is that it takes a lot of collaborative effort and partnership working to agree what you want to achieve. Even getting the net zero date for 2037 was a long conversation. Then getting into the actions about how you might want to do that, understanding how ambitious there would be, and then demonstrating through quantification, even though they feel ambitious, they're probably not going to be enough. We know it's only 20%, and then getting into delivery. Delivery is where our focus is at the moment. Our plan was from 2020 to 2025, so we're just coming towards the last 18 months of that delivery. So we're now looking towards where we need to be for 25 to 2030. And this latest baseline assessment that Chris has presented on will help us do that. We won't be repeating another one, but we will be repeating it later in that plan cycle to help us understand our glide, as it were, down that graph I showed you towards 2037 to understand how effective those actions have been. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tim, and thank you again, Chris. We have some time for questions for both Chris and Tim, or either Chris and Tim. Please use the raise hand function, and you can also place your question in the chat. Thank you again. Oh, James, please go ahead.
Yeah, it's. I suppose in part it's a bit of a challenge to others, because I think the interesting, exciting bit that comes from this is to try and go beyond, I suppose, your own internal. So if you take any one of the park authorities, they're tiny entities, you know. So in context of Loch Lomond, it's like 220 tons of carbon emissions a year. It's pathetic in a sense, but it's 650,000 tons if you look across the entire landscape. And I think, especially in European context, where these are living landscapes more so than sort of wilderness, that feels to be where the challenge exists. If we can't figure out how to live and work and interact with nature in a nature positive and carbon neutral or even carbon negative way, then we're somewhat doomed. And I think what I pick up from this is the challenge is bigger than parks. So much bigger than we can achieve. So the question then that follows is, where can we find influence or leverage to exert wider policy change or wider investment that can actually give us a meaningful chance of taking a crack at this and becoming potentially super sinks down line? But the journey to that is colossal, and I can't help but feel that that's true of quite a lot of the rest of the world. I think it'd be fascinating to understand if others are wrestling with that, or indeed if this work might help some others to sort of step forward.
Thank you, James. And we can certainly pick that question up again at the end, and over to you, Sean, for your question.
Hey, thanks. So I'm curious as you developed your pathway to net zero graphics, you know, these nice slides you put together. Two questions. One, it seems to me that a good bit of the energy or focus for our efforts need to be in the visitor sector, right? If you look at those graphs, they stand out as the food and waste and the travel by visitors, by others, which we don't have a lot of control over in our organization. So how do you expect to influence that? Number one, those two large chunks of your graph, and how do you get there? And number two, how confident are you with your projections going forward? 80%, 90%. What level of confidence do you believe you have with those projections? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we're not highways authorities in the sense where we have control over the roads or the road network within our patch. But interestingly, you know, if you compare the South Downs where I'm based and the Lake District where Tim is, it's almost the converse that's the issue. with Tim, the travel issue is all around visitors and people going and visiting the park. For us, we have a large resident population. We have 3 very large settlements within the national park. So it's all about travel by local residents. So it's the opposite, the complete opposite of that. So the tools and approaches that we need to adopt are slightly different. And it is around that encouraging more active travel where not only possible, but entirely plausible and comfortable for people to travel across the national park without having to revert to a private car, and making that really convenient. So there are approaches that we can do. It's hard work, but it's necessary because, as you say, it's a significant part of our overall carbon picture. And if we're not engaging in that, then we're missing a trick. And it is, again, that point that James was making. Our profile means that we can exert influence beyond our boundary on that and encourage that behavior change. I think at the moment, the sort of work we're doing around behavior change isn't that well developed. We want to do an awful lot more. And again, that's something that I think we can develop collectively with the other UK national parks about how do we address these challenges? How do we get these messages across to the public? I mean, in terms of the second question about the degree of confidence, it's as good an evidence base as we can get at this stage. And before that, we didn't have anything to base our trajectory on. And I'm very conscious that a lot of organizations have set net zero targets that aren't science-based. They have no idea whether they're realistic or not, whether they can hit them or not. And in many cases, they won't be able to because they haven't really taken time to understand what does it actually mean. We at least know that ours is as good as they can get. And, yes, there's going to be a challenge around delivering some of them, but, with a fair wind, if we get behind some of these interventions, we know at least we're heading in the right direction. And I think with the net zero piece, it is really a mechanism about driving things in the right direction at the end of the day.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. And Tim, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Thanks, Chris. I totally agree. It is that demonstration, I think, of leadership in getting us in the right direction and sending us on that trajectory to get us where we need to be. That's so critical and important, particularly that leadership piece to tie that, I guess, that loop together now that James started talking about at the beginning when he introduced the session. I think for me around the influence locally here, it's about, because the visitor economy is so big in the Lake District, it's about working with that through our business task force, and it's around working carefully with them and gently without, I guess, not scary is the wrong word, but giving the impression that we will stop visitors from coming to the park because we need to reach net zero. That's not what we're trying to communicate. We've got a big challenge on our hands. So if I remember correctly, it's about 89% of our visitors arrive by private car, and then 82% of those people then stay in their private car and drive around afterwards. So that's why our visitor emissions are so high. We're doing work to move them onto different modes of travel, improving the bus, for example, the bus routes, adding a line, adding a timetable change in the rail network into the Lake District, for example, things like that, to try and encourage as much as possible and make it as easy as possible for that modal change. And I think it will just take time for that to happen. But when you've got challenges like cost of living, inflation and stuff like that, it does become more and more challenging and harder to work through. And these are things you can't predict, but you must adapt to during the delivery of your partnership plan, your management plan for the place. How confident do I feel? I have a whole heap of hope about it. I think that's the best way to deal with it. I think it's so important that we maintain that commitment to getting to where we need to be and be hopeful for it. I think it is possible to get us on it and to start making some of those changes we need. Will we reduce our carbon reduction emissions by 800,000 tonnes or so in this first 5-year plan? I don't think we will, but we must make it. We must make the best effort on that. I think what we're best placed to do is make those local, place-based decisions around it. So that formulation of our activities was done in collaboration with our 22 partners and with wider stakeholders, the community groups and so forth, to have that ownership and that empowerment in the park. I think that's the only way locally that we could probably achieve that without being too top down. I think if we came along and said, this is what we want to do, we're going to do it, you start to disengage people. We have to take folk with us. The big communication exercise, just as much as it is important to show that leadership, I think.
Excellent. Thank you, Tim, and thank you again, Chris. We'll move to we'll hold questions and move to our next presenter, Sean Norton, from the U.S. National Park Service, who will be presenting on the Green Parks Plan. The floor is yours, Sean.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Sean Norton. I'm a Program Manager for Sustainable Operations and Climate Change here in the United States National Park Service. We're going to talk today about the Green Parks Plan and how our plan for net zero, if you will, staying on that theme that we've just heard previously. Next slide, please. So this just a very quick history lesson. We started our greening efforts, if you will, sustainability efforts in earnest back in 2012. First edition of our Green Parks Plan was released. Since then, of course, we've learned a lot, and we've had a lot of change in our political structure here in the States, as you might imagine. There's been some up and downs in terms of us getting fits and starts and getting started with some of our sustainability initiatives. But we've got a 2016 re-release in conjunction with our 100th anniversary, and now about 10 years out from 2012, our third edition of the Green Parks Plan. And each version has really moved us forward towards understanding our platform and responding to the challenges. It should note that this plan is really works in conjunction with a larger set of planning documents that we have in the organization, and this is our NPS climate change response strategy, right? So this is just the mitigation component of that larger climate change response strategy. And what we'll talk about today is how it's been consolidated. Back in 2012, we had 10 goal categories. As first time we were out there, we were really just trying to think it through. And by 2023, we really feel like we have a more refined approach. And so many of these goal areas have been refined and consolidated. Next slide, please. So we'll quickly move through some of these goal categories, 5 goal categories specifically: be climate friendly and climate ready. And for each of these, we've put together an overarching objective, right? Underneath each of the objectives are a number of goals and sub-objectives. So for climate friendly and being climate ready, we want to achieve net zero GHG emissions. I should emphasize that this is for our operational footprint. We've heard a lot about the visitor footprint, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but the numbers and the goals I'm setting forth today are specifically for our operational footprint. Be energy smart and water wise, achieve net zero water use and net zero energy use. Buy green, reduce, reuse, and recycle, achieve net zero waste and sustainable procurement, and greening our rides, adopting and supporting net zero transportation methods. You can see a theme here, net zero. And then the larger goal category, last one, and one that sort of is probably the most important, fostering a sustainability ethic. And we've just previously finished up a conversation about how you and others want to engage the workforce, partners, visitors, stakeholders, and communities to support our sustainability, climate change, resilience, and environmental justice objectives. Next slide, please. So in addition to having a large strategic document with existing goals in it, we've taken the opportunity to build out an implementation strategy document. This is the cover page of that document. This focuses on our operations and identifies specific things that our parks, our regions, and our headquarters office here in Washington, D.C. should take. And this is a focused document just for 2 years. At such time, we will re-engage and produce a new implementation strategy. Next slide, please. All right, so real quickly, we're going to try and highlight in each goal category a few of our objectives. Remember, we said we want to combat the climate crisis by achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions. So within that, we'd say we want to reduce scope 1 and 2 emissions from our operations 65% by 2030 using a 2008 baseline, and then reduce emissions across our NPS portfolio of buildings, campuses, and installations 50% by 2032 using a 2008 baseline, and achieve net zero emissions by 2045. In addition to that, we should note, because we have had a conversation about sequestration, carbon sequestration, we note objective 3, maintaining or increasing net carbon storage through constructed or maintained asset rehabilitation and natural restoration projects. So we have objective 4, sequestering, identifying, sequestering carbon in not just our maintained assets, but in our natural environment. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I said, we have an implementation strategy document that goes along with our high-level goal document. And here's just an example of how we've structured WASO. On your left, you'll see WASO. That's a Washington Support Office, Washington, D.C. And then regional actions is the middle column, and then park actions is that far right column. So just as an example, we are going to, in Washington, D.C., we've taken the responsibility of updating this document that we call Addressing Climate Change and Natural Hazards Handbook, which we've recently completed and rolled out to the field. This document influences every project going forward because every project must identify the natural hazards associated with the project and complete a fairly comprehensive checklist to determine how that project will be influenced by these natural hazards, such as sea level rise, wildfire, all the others that you might imagine. In the park actions, you have a list of things that the parks are now required to do, developing projects that maximize the reduction of GHG emissions and, in fact, work towards net zero, using the document, this Climate Change and Natural Hazards Handbook, for project development. As an example, prioritizing resiliency planning for constructed assets. Just an example of how the local actions, implementation strategies will influence our goal progress. Next slide, please. Okay, next goal category, be energy smart and water wise. Again, I'm just going to pick out a couple of examples of our major objectives: achieving net zero energy and water at exclusively metered facilities within covered facilities. Our covered facilities, for the purpose of discussion today, are our top 75% consumption parks. So it's usually our big parks, as you might imagine, and those parks that demonstrate fully 70%, 75% of our energy use agency-wide. Objective number 5, as you can see, they're converting fossil fuel use to electric power so that 100% of our facility use is carbon-free by 2030. Next slide, please. Just one or two more implementation actions. Again, building upon how we're going to get it done. If you look at item 2 on the left, headquarters, myself and my staff, we will expand existing energy and water evaluation program to sponsor and manage a limited number of evaluation of parks beyond our covered facilities. Remember, I noted 75% of our energy footprint is already, we're doing those energy and water evaluations every 4 years. We want to go beyond that and make sure everybody's getting evaluated. At the park level, as you can see on the right, we want to make sure that they are identifying and prioritizing buildings with high energy use intensity for improvements. We want them to include energy use intensity and electric grid carbon intensity information in all project designs. And we want them to develop carbon-free electricity solutions and deep energy retrofits where recommended. Again, examples of what we expect the parks to be doing to meet the goals of the Green Parks Plan. Next slide, please. And as you can see, this is a very large goal category. We have a number of actions at both the headquarters, region, and park level. This is just an example, another example I'll highlight. Number 7 on the left, partnering with our National Renewable Energy Laboratory to conduct renewable energy optimization studies and provide renewable energy installation tools and management training. That's an ongoing project that we have with our National Renewable Energy Lab, and that has been deployed already. At the park level, we want them to identify the site level needs for renewable energy assessments, work with NREL to make that happen, develop scopes of work for renewable energy projects, which can be reviewed by our National Renewable Energy Lab. Next slide, please. All right, we're going to move into a different category here, goal category. This is buying green, reusing, and recycling. Our major objectives, you can see on the right, include sustainable procurement in 100% of applicable construction and service contracts, and divert 50% of municipal solid waste by 2025 and 75% by 2030. And lastly, I will add item 5 on the right, phasing out single-use plastic products by the end of 2032. Next slide, please. And here's a few actions. I'll just pull as an example. On the left, headquarters-based actions. Number 4 on the bottom, develop, communicate, and manage an NPS plastics elimination and reduction plan. That elimination and reduction plan is scheduled to go out of our office this week on the 1-year anniversary of a secretarial order that called for the elimination of all plastic products in our parks by 2032. We are rolling out 1 year into that order. A plan for doing so, focused largely year 1 on improving our data collection, improving our systems of record to collect data and make sure we can understand what our baseline conditions are at the park level. Park actions on the right, ensure purchase of card holders, those are credit card holders. Project managers and contracting officers attend in training that we're putting on for all parks, ensure best practices for green acquisition, alternative product information tools and technologies are shared with the card holders. As you can see, there's a number of park level actions that are focused on buying green, reducing, reusing, and recycling, and all in the hopes of achieving a net zero waste and sustainable procurement park status. Next slide, please.
And just a quick check-in, Sean, we're just coming up to about 12 minutes.
Very good. Green Art Rides, a transition 100% of eligible fleet to ZEVs. Next slide, please. Here's a number of objectives. You can see that our job is to disseminate guidance. We've done that this year. And of course, at the park level, we want them to implement the policy and guidance that we've distributed. Next slide, please. And the last goal category, fostering a sustainability ethic. We want to develop and foster partnerships that promote sustainability and increase efforts to engage youth. Next slide, please. And to do that, we are pursuing multiple funding strategies, including philanthropic partnerships and grants. And of course, at the park level, we're producing a number of, just as an example, green tourism practices on our park website so that visitors, when they go to seek information from the park, they can learn how to do it in a green manner. Next slide, please. And that's it. Here's my information, my division chief, as well as myself and some of my staff here in DC. Thank you, and I'll be glad to take some questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sean. And please, yes, use the raise hand function or the chat for any questions. Okay, seeing no questions at this time, I'll thank you again. Yes, thank you, Sean, and congratulations on the 2045 target. That's a number we don't often hear associated with net zero, and it's ambitious. And thank you again. Oh, and there is a quick question, Sean, if you don't mind joining us again. Is the plan publicly available or public facing for download?
Yeah, I'll put it into the chat here in a moment. Let me go find it on my desktop, and I'll put it in the chat so that everyone can have a copy of it going forward. And please feel free to reach out to me via email for any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you again. Excellent. We'll now move to our final presenter, Genti Koromida, who is from the Institute for Nature Conservation in Albania. And Genti will be presenting on enhanced energy efficiency for local park communities in the Prespa National Park. And there we go. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, I'm talking from Albania, which is afternoon here. And I'll show this small example from some activities we have done under this Transboundary Biosphere Reserve Prespa project, which is a project funded by the German government, helping Albanian government to implement the management plan for the Prespa National Park. So if you can go to the next slide, I can show you little things about the Prespa National Park. It's located in the area, in the border between Greece, Albania, and North Macedonia. It's a very important biodiversity area. And more than 20 years ago, it was established as a national park encompassing more than 27,000 hectares of the Prespa Lakes basin in Albania. So as I said, the area is important for biodiversity, a lot of interesting habitats and many species of conservation importance. So of course, the project in general, it's about supporting protected area administration in implementing the management plan and achieving conservation goals. But as part of overall activities, we decided to spend some time and money on this energy efficiency issue. So you can go to the next slide. So the main objective, why we did it, is to thinking about biodiversity, preservation of biodiversity, so to reduce pressure on natural forest in the area. But then we saw that this also contribute largely to climate change adaptation. Just a little bit of context, the area, the park area includes a number of villages. There are about 11 villages and more than 6,000 people living within the park. And their main energy source is fuel wood. So they use it for heating and cooking in the household. And so this puts a lot of pressure on the forest resources of the park. So in order to address this, we thought it will be important to showcase some measures that improve energy efficiency and the use of energy in the household of the area. So for that, we did some actions. If we go to the next slide. Actions that started initially with the assessment of the energy consumption at household level, and then identification of measures that could be implemented at the household level. And the measures include things from insulation, construction, better windows, better doors, or supplying of energy efficiency stoves, or replacing light bulbs and things like that. And so we also helped provided financing to the household to implement, and also advice on how to implement those measures, and then again assessed the level of energy used by households after the implementation was met, and then calculated the reduction. Of course, the whole operations, how important is energy efficiency and how it can contribute to both biodiversity and climate change mitigation and adaptation. So in the next slide. In very short, well, we measured the success by reduced energy demand for household and tried to convert that into the amount of fuel wood saved. So less fuel wood saved on an annual basis from these households. Of course, we made some more calculations about the CO2 emissions reduced as a result of this lower energy consumptions, and it shows some to us interesting numbers that these measures could contribute to CO2 emissions reduction. And then another measure of success, I think, it was the level of awareness of local communities on energy efficiency measures, renewable energy sources, and importance of implementing these measures at the household level, and how this can be important to the park as well. Of course, this was not that easy to be implemented. If we go to the next slide, because there were a lot of challenges in implementing that. First of all, there was limited understanding and limited awareness of local communities about renewable energy sources or energy efficiency measures and why they are important and how to implement that. Of course, community members were reluctant to participate to the scheme as it required some small contributions from their part into the investments, and considering that the cost of investments for this measure is a little bit high compared to the household income, they are not really willing to invest those money into those measures. On the other hand, there is no available resources from local or central government to support such measures. There are no subsidies to governmental programs that could help local communities to invest in implementing such energy efficient measures that are really important for, as I said, both contributing to biodiversity protection in this case of national park, but also to climate change adaptation and mitigation issues. And I think this is the last slide. So if there is any question, I'm open to answer and address them accordingly. So thank you very much for this opportunity to present this small example from Albania. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And do we have any questions for, and my apologies, Genti?
Genti, yeah.
Genti, yes. Thank you. My apologies. Do we have any questions? An excellent example of the local scale contributions and the importance of action at the local scale. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, it was interesting example of working with local communities with perhaps a very low baseline of understanding around the energy efficiency to start with. But was there any discussion around the increased resilience that would provide them in terms of energy use for the future? Is that something that's been taken on board by the communities themselves? Because that's certainly an issue for us, encouraging people to understand with the cost of energy now, actually, it's a really good direction to be moving in.
Well, that's a good question. As I said, there is limited awareness and understanding. The first issue is that as things stand in Albania, fuel is very cheap, or it's free to get. So it's less competitive than any other source of energy. But with increased enforcement from park authorities and better policies from local government and central government, so supporting other means of energy like gas, for example, it's an opportunity. I think people will get aware as it gets more hardly to get fuel to collect firewood in the forest. They are easily changing their mind and shifting to other sources of energy. So this goes hand in hand as enforcement is improved and policies are also improved in supporting other sources of energy.
Excellent. Thank you, Genti, and thank you for the question, Chris. Any additional questions? Okay. Seeing none.
Thank you very much, then.
Thank you again. We'll move to the next section of the agenda. I'd just like to again thank all of our presenters for the excellent presentations. We've had I think a very an exploration of activities to reduce emissions, greenhouse gas emissions in parks and park-related operations at multiple scales. This has been incredibly fascinating, and I'm looking forward to sharing a bit of an overview in the summary. Prior to that, though, I'd like to open the floor again to any, for questions posed to any of the presenters today. We can take a few moments to do that, and then we'll move into a group discussion focused around a couple of Mentimeter questions we've created, and this will allow us to see to do a bit of a quick poll. But before that, are there any burning questions for the presenters today? Please go ahead. Perhaps I will jump back to the question that James asked earlier, or that he posed earlier, and I see that Trevor responded in the chat. That question being around the budget behind the initiatives that Trevor was speaking about, but I'd apply that to the initiatives, any of the initiatives that we've seen. are there examples of low-cost options or low-cost actions that can drive big impacts, that can really take a chunk out of that wedge, the emissions wedge curve, to advance our emissions reduction activities? Does anyone, would any of the presenters like to share anything around budgets that they may not have addressed in their presentation, or innovative sources of funding?
I will only say thank you for the question, that we're somewhat fortunate here. As you know, just a couple of years ago, we had a major political cycle, and President Biden was elected, and he, back in two major events occurred that really have changed the trajectory for us, at least for the foreseeable future. And that is, one, he distributed an executive order back in February of 2022 that directed federal agencies to work towards net zero. That was the first of its kind. It had not existed before that. So that's a big shift in titanic shift in our direction. The second thing, and probably as importantly, is budget. We were fortunate enough to get passed a bipartisan law called the Inflation Reduction Act. And that Inflation Reduction Act has and will bring major investment into the clean energy economy. For us specifically, it's bringing in a lot of money for electric vehicles and vehicle charging infrastructure. In addition to that, it's bringing in a lot of money for climate change vulnerability assessments. So in those three key areas, we're seeing a considerable budget that we will frankly have a hard time spending in the next 2 to 3 years. It's in the $500 million mark. So doesn't say that it's sustainable. We know it may only be for 2 to 3 more years, but at least for now, it's been a welcome change to our budget and our policy direction. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Sean. Thank you. And Chris,
sorry, Alex, I didn't have a question. I was just paying attention to what's being said there.
My apologies. My apologies. Are there any other I guess responses that the presenters would add to this question of budgets and identifying those low cost options that drive big change, that are associated with big impacts?
I probably have something, Alex, in terms of picking up on that community resilience piece. We're doing a lot of work around community energy and community renewables. And that's proving very popular with local communities because it puts energy and decisions around energy within the scope of their own influence. And they're able to develop and own energy assets and benefit from those directly, and effectively start to develop local grids and options around sort of powering up and depowering in terms of their local communities. And I think, to me, that is probably one of the most efficient and cost-effective ways of driving this kind of change, is putting those kind of tools in the hands of our local communities who really want to take action on climate change. They're often frustrated because they see relative inaction from governments on some of these bigger themes around emissions reductions, around energy and transport, and want to address it as much as they can themselves. So I think, again, national park authorities and other protected landscapes have a role in facilitating and sharing that as best practice and scaling those kind of examples up.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Chris. Thank you. We have a couple of comments or questions from Tim. I think I saw your name first, and then Genty.
Thanks, Alex. My camera's swinging into action there. I was just thinking about what you were saying about low-cost projects, and we've had a European-funded project, ECF2, we call it the Low Carbon Lake District, which looked at giving community grants to greening businesses for energy reduction. And I'm just trying to drag out the data actually from, just to show the sort of cost we got on it and the ratio between pounds spent and energy reduction. So maybe if Genty wants to go next, I'll come back whilst I find that data, and I can just give you an indication of what we've achieved on it.
Wonderful. That sounds great. Excellent. Over to you, Genti.
Yeah, if I can just give some numbers from our example, of course, they are small compared to what Sean is presenting and the others are presenting. But in our case, in our example in Prespa, on the average, the amount spent for household was around 15,000 euros, and the households were required to co-finance 15% of that. So I think the overall operation for 19 households participating in the program was around 350,000 euro with all the experts involved and all the expertise in assessing and developing all this. I think at the end, the expense is justified by the results. And as I said, it's important to showcase and to provide examples to local communities that these things works, and then they can engage into those activities by themselves. If they see that they work and they really reduce their amount of energy used and the amount of energy bill they pay or an amount of firewood they have to collect in the forest. So it's important to provide this seed money at the beginning to just build these examples and show that they works.
Excellent, thank you. Yes, demonstrating leadership and realistic solutions. Yeah, Tim, do you have the data at hand?
Yeah, I do now. Thank you. So there's a range of projects which we funded, everything from EV chargers, heat recovery, efficient appliances through to solar PV. And the biggest reductions we found per £5,000 invested was 21 tons of CO2, say per 5,000 invested for EV chargers, and heat recovery was 13.6 tons. So you get a good ratio between having that small investment into the reduction you start to see from that investment. We've just tested that out as an idea with that money to sort of what's possible in the future. So we'll take that learning, put that into our next partnership plan action, we think.
Excellent. Thank you, Tim. Thank you. At this juncture, I'd like to transition us to the Mentimeter questions, and I'll call upon my colleague Tara to share the link. Mentimeter, for those who haven't used it, is it's kind of a crowd-based polling tool. I'll share the results on my screen or share with all of you the results, and the link is in the chat presently.
Yeah, so Alice will share the link, and if you can please click on the thumbs up when you see that, and I will wait for everyone to join on that link. Okay, I see people are still joining. 11 people join and waiting for a few more to join.
Okay.
Is anyone still waiting to join? I guess
Perhaps
not.
Yeah, let's move ahead, Tara, and then we people can continue to join afterward, I believe.
Sure, yeah.
Great. So the first question you'll see on the Mentimeter is, what are the take-home messages from these presentations? So for you, what was one take-home message, or if there were several messages that you've extracted, that you've pulled from these presentations, please do share. And again, I'll share the results with everyone via my screen. And I'm not sure, Tara, the results as they're coming in, perhaps we can, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Answers are still coming in, so maybe we can wait for a few moments.
Okay, excellent. We'll advance. There's a second question, and once we've received all of the responses, we can share the results.
Okay, I guess we have the answers. So if anyone is still typing, they can raise their hand so we can, wait for a while. Okay, so we will move on to the next question now.
Great, thanks, Tara.
Oh, are you seeing next question now? Oh, here.
Yes, it just appeared.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So the second question is, what are the barriers and opportunities in your projects and the projects you're working on within your organization related to greening operations or the reduction of emissions and improvements in energy efficiency, or if you're working on nature-based solutions and the natural environment side of things, please feel free to share those as well. And I believe I misspoke earlier. It's Tara who will have to share her screen, given that she's moderating the Mentimeter. We will keep these open. There should be an opportunity to submit multiple responses. The link will remain live over time, and we'll share a collection, or we'll share a compilation of all of the responses we've received as part of the meeting summary that will be sent out in the next few days. Yeah, and we may, just in the interest of time, Tara, we may want to extract the results now and just take a look at them, so we can have a bit of a discussion if there are any insightful comments that were made.
Okay, sure. I will share the results.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, right. Yes. And let me share the results now.
And of course, all of the comments will be insightful. I shouldn't have suggested some are better than others. Great. So thank you. So yes, from the and thanks again, Tara. The initial question, the take-home messages. So yes, we're there's a lot of ambition here. There's lots of work to do. We have the importance of examples, of demonstrating, of de-risking some of these approaches, so that there's more buy-in, there's more acceptance. We can drive that behavior change. We can't do this alone. National parks are the places where sustainability or sustainable and low carbon living can be demonstrated. An excellent example, lots of examples from around the world, and something I speak for myself as someone sitting in Canada. Great examples of residents living within the boundaries of national parks, which is something that's a bit foreign to us in the Canadian context. At least largely. Great to see the engagement and behavioral change there. And now I believe Tara's transitioning to the, oh, sorry, there we go. Travel to and from protected areas is a major issue, and one that we can't tackle alone, and certainly involves cooperation. And perhaps if we I don't know if you were able to scroll down, Tara, if there are additional questions or additional responses there. Local engagement is key. Influence, influencing community and visitor behavior.
Yeah, it's not allowing me to
Okay.
move down. Sorry.
Are there any comments anyone would like to make in relation to any of the answers you see?
Oops.
Oh,
Oops. Yeah, just a second.
okay. Or if anyone would like to expand on anything that's here.
I think that issue you raised there about the different nature of the national parks. You know, in the UK, we're Category 5 IUCN, which generally means we have large resident populations within the park, which I think kind of does exacerbate the challenges around dealing with the carbon picture and encouraging behaviour change. But it's also an opportunity, as I said, in terms of that wider reach and being able to demonstrate that this is the place where this sort of low carbon living can happen.
Excellent. Certainly, and you have an audience that is very connected to nature within those sites. Certainly, excellent. Thank you, Chris. Any other comments, reflections, responses that weren't added? Go ahead, James.
Yeah, if I could pick up that sentiment of the national parks are places where sustainable and low carbon living can be demonstrated. I think I mentioned this in the comment. And in a way, our own language, I think, holds us back. We start from the idea of protected areas, and it's right, there is lots to protect, but protect doesn't mean preserve an aspect. It means evolve and develop, because in practice, sadly, amongst us on this call, I suspect very few of the landscapes that we have the privilege to steward are actually in the sort of shape they could or should be. So actually, this is about recover and restore. It's about moving forward. And this idea, therefore, that we actually should be a place of experimentation, a place of innovation, a place, and you used the phrase, Alex, sort of de-risk from we have a whole list of attributes for investors that make us a lower risk and therefore a more desirable investment in terms of how we might go forward. And I do think we should be challenging almost our own language and rhetoric around what we are and therefore what we could and should be doing. My sense is we're doing a fair amount of that internally, but I don't know how much of that we shared with external partners to say, no, we're a nature investment zone. Forgive the language. I know some of those things are slightly loaded in particular political context, but it's that reframing, I think, feels powerful. Could we model, and especially in the context of Cat 5, all those boundary areas around the big wilderness parks where there are populations, could we model what the future of a low carbon, nature positive rural economy actually looks like? And should we start to talk about economic impact and talk about the economy and sort of claim that for our own and say, no, we actually have the ability to define what this could or should look like, because we actually really genuinely understand the people in our places and the landscapes that we have. We have that level of expertise. So it's sort of musing aloud, but I think there's something in our own language that we should challenge internally and reframe those perceptions for external supporters, investors, whatever you might call them.
Certainly. Very well said, James. That's thank you for that. That's I like that. Yeah, the modeling the future of a nature positive, low carbon reality and economy. Definitely a ambitious, but something that we are well poised to do. I see that we are at time. If everyone has a couple of moments they're able to spare, just as we wrap up, I'll ask Tara to quickly transition us to the results of the second slide, or the second question, sorry. Great. So here, so the barriers and opportunities, we're seeing funding, grid capacity, our own language. Yes, going back to your very very salient point, James. Our own language can be limiting, or can create a mindset that we need to overcome. Subject matter expertise at the project level, national policy and guidance. Yes, there's a question of who is the first mover, who takes that first step. Limited awareness and understanding of local communities, going back to that behavioral change, the awareness raising, the importance of having buy-in. Thank you so much, James, for attending, and thank you again for your presentation, your introductory presentation, and for creating the space for all of us to come together. Thank you. On that note, I'll draw the meeting to a close. We will be sharing a summary. The Mentimeter poll will remain live following the meeting. We'll keep it open for 48 hours. And I just wanted to end off saying that, well, thanking all of our presenters once again. And it's really impossible to sum up beyond what takeaways were shared already. We've seen actions at all scales. We've seen top-down, bottom-up initiatives, the importance of evidence to inform action, and realistic and incremental actions. One of the things that kept coming back in my mind was you can't manage what you don't measure and monitor over time, and you don't understand the scale of the challenge until you begin that process. And so that's the scale is demonstrated in the pathways, the emissions reduction pathways we create, but ensuring that we have the tools to inform and raise awareness of our stakeholders, partners, residents, our political decision makers, is very critical. Behavioral change really is at the root of all of it in many ways, and we share a responsibility. The importance, the scalability, the importance of scaling our actions and acting at all of the appropriate scales is key. And we share a responsibility as a global protected and conserved areas community, and as citizens of our respective nations and jurisdictions. So really fascinating, a fascinating array of presentations today. Thank you again. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll be in touch with a summary. So please enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are. And thanks again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you guys very much, everyone.
Okay.
That was great, guys. Thank you. Oh, and I
Yeah.
guess we can stop recording.
Yes. There.
Great.